Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Incomplete Skeptic. I have a fantastic guest today, and I will let her introduce herself.
My name is Twila Brase. I am president and co-founder of Citizens Council for Health Freedom. And we are located in the state of Minnesota, but do national work. Our mission is to protect patient and doctor freedom. And we deal with a whole variety of issues under that title. But I know that today we're going to particularly be talking about Real ID, which is a strange thing for many people to hear from a health freedom organization, but I can explain why.
Great, thank you, Twila. I think you're blazing a trail, and you've been doing this for a while. So Twila, the blazer trailer. Okay, not grammatical, but so I've seen a number of your videos, and you are a pioneer in defending medical rights for people. I really love that, and I was really shocked to find out some of the things I found out about HIPAA and the like. What drew my attention to you in the first place is I caught a video on the Real ID, and a friend of mine had just gotten one and was talking about it. And I thought, okay, coincidence or not? And then I watched some more, and then I reached out to you and your organization, and you graced me with a yes answer to be on the podcast. And I see you're super busy doing podcasts, and going to try and help you get that information out there. So that's a long thank you very much. I went to the government website to look at Real ID, and it just looked like a scare list to me. And I was like, oh, what is it? And when are they going to enforce it? And what does that mean? So it seemed like the first thing they wanted to do is scare people. What do you see when you look at the website, and what does your work mean in reference to dispelling myths about the control mechanisms that we're facing?
Well, I think the first thing that I want to say about that is that we have a very special page related to this issue with a very specific opinion on it. And so the page is called refuserealid.org, refuserealid.org. So you can tell what we want the American people to do, and we give a lot of information there on why we say that, but also how to refuse the Real ID. And since you've got a lot of people in Minnesota, we have had people in Minnesota who are having a success in going back to the state driver's license and leaving the federal ID behind. So what we know, we've had a long history of fighting Real ID in this state, our organization, because, well, maybe I should just start with the history of Real ID, because I think that might let people know a little bit more what it is and why there was controversy from the get-go. So after 9/11, they did a report, a 9/11 report, in which it was mentioned about an identification system, which is interesting because all of those people on all the terrorists who took those planes had IDs that would have passed even today, getting them on a plane. Nonetheless, in 2005, the Real ID Act was put into a must-pass bill to fund national defense spending bill to fund our soldiers in Iraq, particularly. And so on the House side, whereas they had some committee action over there, on the Senate side, it was never heard in a committee. It never was heard in a conference committee, which is the House and the Senate coming together and discussing and debating it. Instead, it was just put into this defense spending bill at the last minute, brought to the floor of the Senate, and the senators were just supposed to pass it. And it caused a lot of consternation on the floor. Tennessee, Republican Tennessee Senator Lamar Alexander, he called it a national identification card, said there hadn't been any public debate, and he thought it shouldn't pass without public debate. a Democrat, Senator Patty Murray. She said it has problems with the Fourth Amendment and privacy concerns, and she never heard it in a conference committee. And what was it doing being put into this must-pass bill without any debate? So anyway, it passed. It
Mm.
became law, but nobody really knew about it for about 3 years. And then they put out a rule in 2008. And I think some people got wind of it in 2007, perhaps with the proposed rule. Because in 2007, 2008, and 2009, approximately 30 legislatures said no to Real ID. So they either passed resolutions or they passed bills prohibiting conformity with the Federal Real ID Act. And some of the things and some of the reasons why is because it was an unfunded mandate. They would have to change all of their driver's license systems. But also, it was the federal commandeering of the states against the 10th Amendment. And it had Fourth Amendment problems with privacy because here was a federal ID card under federal control being imposed through the states by the federal government hijacking the state DMVs and actually deceiving the people. Because even if you ask people today who have a real ID, they just think it's a driver's license with a star. Anyway, so for a while after all those states said no, it just sat there. But then in late 2015, President Obama said to the masses and to the media that if people did not have the real ID by 2016, they would not be able to fly. So, unlike when this happened in 2005 and the media didn't discuss it at all, now the media herald it from every rooftop, scaring the American public into calling their legislators who had prohibited the real ID and telling those legislators essentially, you've got to fix this. I have grandchildren to see. I'm going to fly to my winter home. I want to vacation. I need to be able to fly in an airplane. And unlike the earlier cast and crew of legislators who saw this for what it was, this later cast and crew just bowed to the public pressure. And so today, all 50 states are issuing real IDs. Most of them have conformed by passing a law, but we are finding out that not all of them have. It's just that the DMV is issuing these federal ID cards. Now, in 2017, so once that happened and they started, conceding and issuing them, there were some states that didn't stand up so nicely. Or they stood up rather, but they didn't bow. And so there were like 116 legislators in Pennsylvania that wrote a letter to President Trump and said, this is a usurpation of states' rights. It's an unfunded mandate. It's a violation of privacy rights, withdraw. And we don't even know if Trump saw the letter. But there was never a response to that we know of. And then in Missouri, they contacted the Attorney General. Senators contacted the Attorney General and said, this is a violation, do something. And of course, Attorney Generals are supposed to be protecting federalism, which means the federal government cannot commandeer the states. There is a clear dividing line between the two. And then there were some other deadlines that passed, right? And then COVID hit. And so then they really waylaid the deadline and they pushed it far up. And then I can't remember what year, maybe 2 years ago, they changed it to May 7th, 2025. And so now what you heard starting in about January was that if you didn't have a real ID, you would, by May 7th of this year, you would not be able to fly. And in fact, President Trump's Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, former governor of South Dakota, she said that on April 11th to the entire American public. She said, if you arrive at the airport on May 7th without a real ID, you will not be able to travel. Well, this was never true. So,
Mm,
and in her position as secretary, she no doubt knew that. There were several things not true about this. TSA allows 16 different identification documents, not just the real ID. And in addition to that, Homeland Security put out a rule in October, proposed a rule in October, and we got a boatload of public comments against that rule. But nonetheless, it was finalized in January under the Biden administration, and it is a progressive enforcement bill. They are not
mm,
expecting full enforcement until May 5th, 2027. And the entire rule, which I have read, is really all about not having a disaster at America's airports. They say things like, we're writing this rule so that we can prevent public backlash against the TSA agents. We're writing this rule so that we cannot have operational dysfunction. We're writing this rule so that there won't be delays at the airport. And so on May 6th, the day before the supposed deadline, Secretary Kristi Noem, is in front of Congress, who asks her, so what's going to happen tomorrow at the airport? Are people without real ID not going to be able to fly? Now remember, on April 11th, she said they won't be able to fly, right? They won't be able to travel.
mhm.
Well, on May 6th, she said, oh no, oh no, no. There'll just be a few more steps to get them through security. We will make sure they meet their travel itinerary. And then the very next day, May 7th, she puts out an Instagram post and she says, if you arrive today, in all caps, today, if you arrive at the airport without a real ID, you won't be able to fly.
Mm.
So when you ask about fear tactics, it is about using fear to get people to comply to a violation of their constitutional rights, a federal commandeering of the states, which is also a violation of states' rights, but also of people's rights, because the 10th Amendment says all the powers that are not allotted to the federal government are for the states and for individuals. And this power has never been given to the federal government.
Well, being a libertarian, there's music to my ears that someone is fighting this sort of thing, and not a libertarian as in the party per se, because that's been fought over and scrapped apart, and seems like the left and the right are kind of doing damage to the organization. But boy, we got people just everywhere in both parties fighting each other over ridiculous things, and they're underinformed. They're scared half to death. It's like, well, I have to do this, and scaring people into submission like we're a lower form of animal or something, and not thinking people. But if people don't stand up um, right away, on this issue, it's just a matter of time before they encroach on more and more rights, and we end up with exactly what we've allowed to transpire, a lack of our freedom, because we said okay. And we can't say okay. We got to stop saying okay and waiting for the other guy to do it. And I'm wondering if you've caught any heat from anybody over what you're doing.
Well, the other thing, so I'll answer that question, but I do want to say as well what the Real ID is, because I haven't really explained it fully enough for people's eyes to be fully opened as to why they should refuse this program or this system. It's really a system. It's not a card, it's a system. So why don't I explain that, and then I'll just talk about heat. So I think the things to know about the Real ID is, one, it is it's a federal ID card for a national surveillance system. It will put into place a social credit system, or a system that can be used as a social credit system in America. And the reason that I say that is because the DMVs, the Department of Motor Vehicles, the main organization of all the DMVs around the state, around the country, testified to Congress on December 5th, 2023. And they said that their plans are to digitize the Real ID, put it on our phones, and have remote real-time access to it.
Wow.
Now, the other thing about this is that according to the Real ID rule, which all the states have agreed to follow as of today, according to the Real ID rule, a biometric photo must be part of the Real ID. Now, we used to have other kinds of photos, which were not biometric, which didn't have all these digital points for facial recognition systems. And so it has to be a digital photo, a biometric photo. And what that really, and then the rule says, and then we can require future additional biometrics, such as thumbprints, palm scans, iris scans, and eventually even DNA, a sample of your DNA. Because DNA can be digitized. I don't know if people really understand that, but it can be. Entire volumes of books and libraries have been stored on DNA. Most people just don't even understand that.
Hmm. I
Okay,
submitted
so
DNA to Ancestry. Do they have access to that?
how about if I answer that question after we're done?
Great.
Because
Okay.
that's a longer answer.
Okay.
So anyway, so what this means is that the government has claimed a right to collect and catalog the coordinates of your body for its control, starting with the face, but it's not limited to the face. And in Oklahoma, they have already added a thumbprint to the Real ID.
Hmm.
So, to understand, it's going to be digitized. It's going to have a biometric photo, which can then recognize you anywhere where you are. In New Jersey, when we did a report probably 6 years ago on the company that is contracted with the TSA to do all of this, that company is called IDEMIA, IDEMIA. It's a French company, and its plan is augmented authentication. So it wants you to not even have to have anything that you hold, but that your body will be your ID. They will have all of your biometrics, and all you'll have to do is pass your palm over something, look up to a camera so your irises are captured, facial recognition. You won't even need a paper because all your bodily coordinates will be in their system, even including up to your gait. How do you walk? Maybe even the tone of your voice. All of these things are biometrics which can be captured. This is part of the Real ID system. And so most people, like I said, think that this is just a driver's license with a star. It's not even a driver's license. It's a federal ID. The federal government has hijacked the state driver's license bureaus to issue this. They've deceived the public by allowing the DMVs to use it as a driver's license, but it is a federal ID. And actually, somebody who switched out of their federal Real ID back to a state driver's license. The DMV agent said, I don't want to be nosy, but I'm kind of curious. Why do you want to go back to a state driver's license? And she said, oh, I just don't want the Real ID. And the agent said, oh, you don't want the federal ID. So you see
Mhm.
that DMVs know that
So
this
they
is
know.
a federal ID, right? Now, the other thing is, it's not just for flight. I should mention that too. And that's according to what the law says. So, if you go to refuserealid.org, you'll get some of this information. But the law says that the Real ID is required for three things: access to federal buildings, access to nuclear facilities, and access to commercial flight. So that's the airlines. But then it adds, and for any other purposes that the Secretary of Homeland Security shall determine. So this one person not having to go back to the president or to Congress can decide to expand the required uses, which means to expand restricted activities that are restricted by whether or not you have the real ID. And we're a healthcare policy organization, a freedom-based organization. And I believe that the easiest way to get people to submit is to add a requirement for access to medical care. Because, people don't have to fly, but they do need access to a doctor. And because this is a wide open door for the Secretary of Homeland Security to just pick whatever he or she wants, to add as a new required use, um, and because the government, local, state, and federal all together fund about 47% of all medical expenses, it is a logical fourth requirement if the secretary would decide. And then it would be no card, no care. It would also likely become the identifier for accessing your medical records or for tying them all together. And it would also probably become the vax passport that we stopped during the COVID times. So to see the entire ramifications of Real ID is really important to convince you that you need to try as hard as possible to turn that thing in, because they want everybody in. And then, as Congressman Massey says, Thomas Massey, he says, you won't understand. You will not know what all their plans are for the Real ID until everyone has one. And our organization intends to make sure everyone does not, and they can never flip the switch. So that's why we want people to go to refuserealid.org and take action.
Well, they'll certainly get the web link in the description when I post it, and I'll be opening my mouth as often as possible. Yeah, I really appreciate what you're doing to keep our freedom intact. Americans love freedom, but unfortunately, they're not intelligently doing everything they can to make it a reality or keep what freedoms we have. They keep just, nitpicking away at everything with the weapons of distraction, I guess. And there's 100 distractions that we get any given day. And then they trust the media, the legacy media. And I'm not seeing them address, I've looked at some of their like channel, I'm not picking on Channel 9. They've all done this to some degree or other. But it's like when they talked about Real ID, they didn't say any of the truths. It was just smokescreen and fear tactics and laughing and nodding, and you need to do this. And it's like, if that's the only information someone's getting, we're not going to have much chance of turning this around. But as Americans are, we love, the alternative media, if you will. And I think it's getting to be a bigger deal. And that's why so many of the big networks are losing out on their endeavor to control everyone through, these particular shows that they've done so well at in the past. And it's because of people like you and thousands of people probably in Minnesota that daily watch alternative media sources. I saw you on Dark Horse, and that was a great one. I've always loved his podcast, and I was so happy to see you there, So, but yeah,
Well, I
take
like
back
what you
over.
said. I liked what you said about weapons of distraction, but there are also weapons of deception, weapons of deception. And so there's a lot of deception going on, and whether the news media looked to see further or just took what they were told, I think that's a real question. And then whether they would be willing to do anything, at this point to try to get people to understand what's going on here. Because I don't even think really that the news media wants a social credit system in this country where they too, as individuals, might be caught in their 15-minute cities, because of course when every time you pull out a digital Real ID on your phone and use it and they know where you are, they may not know exactly what you're purchasing or what you're doing with it, but let's just say you're in the gun shop. Well, they could even require, a Real ID for you to get a gun. But no matter what, if you just look at the tracking part of it, since the progressives and the Marxists want us in 15-minute cities, they would be able to know when we left the 15-minute city. And I know that there's interest on, taxing for carbon use, right? And so people who left their 15-minute cities too often might be targets for being taxed more. We just don't even know how this would play, and it really probably depends on who's in office. But if we had, I mean, we're having enough trouble with Real ID with Trump in office, because I'm not sure that he understands this issue. And Kristi Noem is doing him no favors if he doesn't want the country to have a social credit system like China, which I don't think that he wants, but he may not understand that. And our letter, so we sent a letter to President Trump, but the White House, and I don't know who in the White House sent it to the TSA to respond. And of course, the TSA said we were blowing smoke. I don't know what we're talking about. And so if you go to refuserealid.org, you will see our redlined version of the TSA letter, because we went through and we wrote the truth into their letter.
I remember that. Yeah. You picked that apart pretty easily. And yeah, by way of deception is standard for the course when people are trying to tyrannize their way to success. There's always money and power involved, and always deceit. So I'm sure the good people in China don't have a whole lot of choice at this point. You know, uh, they murdered their way to success, and they lied their way to success, and success is a bad choice of words, I suppose. But a person can succeed at winning something and do it pretty in nasty ways, So we got to stand up for our freedom. We got to love our freedom, and don't be worried if someone thinks that we're wingnuts. I've been called a wingnut just because I had an opinion on something that I thought was just about personal freedom. And it's like, where did you get that idea? He couldn't draw. It's like when I questioned it, that person couldn't draw a logical line to the basis of why he said what he said. And what I like about your work is that you are drawing a line and you are giving the evidence for your perspective on Real ID. And I love that you call it federal Real ID. And I really despise the word real being bandied around in reference to this federal piece of, paving the way to losing our ability to have a good life, so.
Well, that whole thing of the word Real ID, right? I'm sure there was an enormous discussion about what should they call this to make it attractive to the American people. And I was talking to a young person who's in college, who this was all very new to him, and he doesn't want it now that he knows what it is. But he said, when they asked me if I wanted, a regular driver's license or if I wanted a real ID, I was like, well, of course I want something that's real. Yeah, give me the real ID, right? And so he didn't even know what he was getting. And in most of these states, there are only 5 states that require you to have a real ID. So they put it into state law that you have to have a real ID. There's no other choice. So there's 45 states that don't. And that means that people in all those other 45 states can go turn it in. And we have a specific instructions. It's called Lose Your Real ID. And it's right there on that refuserealid.org website or webpage. Anyway, and so, in all those other states, 45 states, some people are going to run into what we call rogue DMV agents, where they have decided that the only thing that you can have is a real ID. In Indiana, there are some agents, and maybe it's the entire state. We're not exactly sure. But in Indiana, for sure, Some people have told us that they went to make the switch and their DMV agent said, well, once you have it, we won't let you switch back. Well, is that law? Is that a rule, or is that just the DMV? And the reason why we say rogue DMVs is because in May we just found out new information from a research article that went to figure out what was happening with Real ID between when all those states said no, and then President Obama, issued this call and claimed that you wouldn't be able to fly. So that was about 9 years. And what she reported is that, having talked to DMV agents, is that the Real ID office, this little tiny office in the Department of Homeland Security with only 5 workers, had realized that even though these laws had been written and passed and signed saying that they couldn't move anywhere to conform to the Real ID Act, and even though the resolutions opposing it had passed, they could work directly with the DMV agents in these states. They could fund the DMV agencies. They could fund the state Department of Transportation. And then the DMVs would just make this all happen, and they would, move themselves basically to 95% of the way to full compliance, while the law said that they couldn't lift a finger. So that's why
Wow.
I mean rogue DMV. There were actually agencies and DMVs that were violating state laws that said we will not comply with Real ID.
Some of my favorite words, we will not comply. You had one of the possible lists is the 3B club, not the Build Back Better, but the Big Beautiful Bill, CCHF perspective, focus on Real ID. Got a few words on that?
Well, it's perhaps less of a focus on Real ID than it is just on knowing a few good things and probably less good things that are in the bill. And one of the good things is that it creates a pandemic accountability committee, and which is going to look at all the money that was given under COVID-19, and much of it which is still stashed away in states and agencies and everybody who went after all those funds, right? And they never used it, right? So they're going to have this response accountability committee that is going to be created to look at this. And a few other good things. They are going to expand access to health savings accounts. So people who have Obamacare coverage, the bronze and the catastrophic, they will be able to get HSAs for the first time. It's also allowing health savings accounts to be paid for out of your coverage, and with a certain amount of money. It's like $150 per month for an individual, or $300 per month for a couple, and that's for direct primary care. And so direct primary care are these doctors and these clinics who have gone independent, and all they take is cash, and they have
Nice.
these direct primary care clinics. And so they're either paid monthly, quarterly, or annually, depending on, every doctor gets to decide how they're going to do it. But the government agencies had wanted to clarify, or they wanted to claim, that direct primary care was not medical care, but a different version of insurance. And so what this big, beautiful bill does is actually gives credence to the fact that the DPC clinics are medical care, and it cannot be put into the health insurance realm, and therefore have restricted access.
Nice.
And then the other thing I would say is that people on Medicare and Medicaid will find it more difficult if they're illegals. They won't be able to stay on, and they won't be able to get on. It'll be much more difficult for them. And then the bill also does something with Trump's, with 20, Trump has done so many executive orders, I don't even know what the number is. But 28 of them got codified, which means that they passed law to permanently put them in the statute as a federal law. And this is good because most executive orders, well, not most, well, almost all executive orders go away as soon as the president is gone. Now, the next president doesn't have to get rid of all those executive orders, but often does. But there are a few executive orders that Biden never got rid of, including our executive order to let people opt out of Medicare without losing their Social Security benefits. And so I'll just say this one thing because I think people don't know is when the Clintons were in office, somebody, and even a lawsuit didn't figure it out, somebody wrote an executive instruction that was put in the operations manual of the Social Security Administration, and it said several things. It said that if you do not enroll in Medicare Part A hospitalization, you cannot have access to your Social Security benefits.
Hmm.
Mind you, this is not a law. It's not a rule. It's just an executive instruction somebody in the Clinton administration put in an operations manual. But it has been followed ever since, as unlawful and unconstitutional as it is. The other thing that it says, which is astonishing, is that if you discover, for instance, that Medicare is rationing your life away, and you figure out some way to get some other coverage, which is almost impossible because that's what they did. They basically age discriminated. As soon as you're hit 65, you've got this major age discrimination. You can't get any other coverage except Medicare. And Medicare is rationing, particularly the Medicare Advantage plans. So let's just say you somehow have secondary coverage and you're like, okay, I'm done with this Medicare. I'm just going to have just my secondary coverage. First of all, the laws don't allow you to do that, making it very difficult. We're trying to change that. But let's just say it worked. If it worked, you'd have to pay back every dime you had received from Medicare and Social Security to that time. And
Wow.
again, not a law, not a rule, just something that someone in the Clinton administration put in an operations manual, and it's been followed ever since. And it's meant to trap the American public once they reach age 65, to trap them in the Medicare system. And Medicare is going bust. And the latest trustees report say it is bankrupt in 2033. And that's only 8 years from now. And they believe it will only be able to pay 89% of all its bills, which means 11% of its bills will have to be covered in some way. Either there will be less care provided, the doctors and hospitals will be told to eat the cost, or Medicare will simply pay less for every service. And so, meaning that more and more doctors and hospitals will say no to taking care of Medicare patients. So it's really important. We're trying to give an escape route. That was our executive order, an escape route to let people opt out and have real health insurance on the outside. It's going to be even more important the further we get towards those deadlines.
Wow. Yeah, that impacts me. I won't get into details, but it's good to hear that stuff. I'm gonna actually go back and listen to this interview again, especially that part. Before we go, though, I want to make sure we spend some time on the Real ID laws in Minnesota and what it means for Minnesotans.
So in Minnesota, it was our organization that fought and won in 2016 and stopped the Real ID system. But in 2017, we were unsuccessful, and including because the Chamber of Commerce was all for the Real ID. And there were some other organizations that shouldn't have been for it that were, and they testified for it and gave the Republicans, it was Republicans putting it in place, gave the Republicans cover to make this happen. And so the state has conformed to Real ID. However, because of our opposition, our law is a little bit different than probably laws all around the country. So if the Secretary of Homeland Security issues something new in just a rule, our law, I believe, completely disappears. It becomes moot. So that was a protection so that if the secretary decided to add healthcare, for example, or you need a real ID to purchase a gun, or you need a real ID to open a bank account, or whatever the secretary would decide to add as a new required use, that here in Minnesota, that would not happen. And what you'll see on the DMV forms, it doesn't have enough information to tell you what the real ID is, and it doesn't tell you that the enhanced driver's license qualifies as a real ID. None of that is on the form when you go to the DMV. But what it does have is it lists 3 different options, and then it gives you some information, but not this information, about the difference between them. And in lots of states, they don't even give you options. They just hand you a real ID, even though you could have a standard driver's license. And then the third thing to know about Minnesota is that it has proven very easy for people to go in and make the switch. And so I would encourage every one of your listeners and every one of them to do that, and everyone to tell everybody else that they know to do it as well. There are 44% of all driver's licenses and IDs that are not compliant with Real ID. So we want to make that to 46% and then 48% and then 50. We want to make it very difficult for them to do what they want to do. We also stopped the digital ID bill in Minnesota last year once they understood that it was going to ping the government every time that thing got pulled out and used. That really shut it down. But there are about 15 states now that have digital IDs, and nobody should get them. Nobody should get them because that is just the digital ID is bad in the first place because of that. But also a digital real ID sets you up for the social credit system. So it's really, that those 2 years of fighting in 2016 and 2017 really gave us a benefit here because they had to write the law more judiciously. But nonetheless, it is fully compliant with the Federal Real ID Act.
Wow, I love everything that you've brought to the table here. And folks, I sure hope that you will do your own research. You don't have to believe me, Twila, anybody else. Start thinking for yourself. But, consider all points of view. That's why I researched people that believed in Real ID, and I didn't find their arguments sound, in my opinion. But, go to Twila's website, Citizens Council for Freedom, Health Freedom, cchfreedom.org. As soon as you're done listening to this podcast, run over there and look, put it in your browser, save it, and do your research and see what you think, And once you figure it out, tell somebody, pass it on, make this a from the ground up movement. Because from the top down, it doesn't seem like it's going to happen without our diligent traction on the issues that really matter.
I should add here that we have a 3-prong attack on Real ID. So one of them is to get the public to realize what the truth is and to act. The second one is to get legislators to realize what the truth is and to not allow themselves anymore to be commandeered by the federal government and to stand up for 10th Amendment rights. And there are 10 states where there are legislators who have proposed bills, including in the state of Minnesota. It is Representative Mecklin and it is Senator Eric Lucero, and the Lucero bill is bipartisan. Senator John Hoffman, who, as you know, was shot, but he's living, and he is on that bill. And then our third one is the AG. So we've sent letters to all AGs in the country with very little results, but now we have had the opportunity to speak to a bunch of AGs in person. And so we are using this prong of attack as well.
And a very good idea at that. Well, I appreciate your time with us, my friend and my new friend. And, God bless you. And we've probably got over 100 people praying for this podcast right now. And yeah, we're some of those folks, we say the G word once in a while. But certainly the topic addresses everybody. And so thank you so much. And ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining the Incomplete Skeptic, and let's go out and make a better world. Peace out.